that are associated with the various project delivery methods, as well as the methods of payment themselves. And I want you to know and understand the advantages of standard forms of contract, how to obtain them, and where and how to go about modifying them. Like I had said at the onset, some of this will be new information, whereas other portions of this will not. So, as you're well aware, there are always three primary parties to any given project, and contractually they are referred to as the owner, the contractor, and the consultant. However, informally or in other ways other than contractual, they are referred to as the owner, the designer, or the builder, or the owner, the contractor, and the architect, depending on how you want to skim it. But from a contractual perspective and a defined term perspective, it's always going to be owner, consultant, and contractor. Construction projects involve at least these three primary parties that we've been discussing. There may be other parties that may be considered primary to any given project delivery method, and we're going to get into talking about that in a little bit. The contractual relationships are always set out in the contract forms themselves. The standard forms of contract are all available from CCDC, and as you all know, CCDC stands for the Canadian Construction Documents Committee. The project delivery method is the structure of the contractual relationships amongst the primary parties. It defines the respective responsibilities, the risks, as well as the rewards, and determines the sequence and timing of the consultant and the contractor's involvement in the given project. The owner is ultimately responsible for determining the project delivery method. However, you as a consultant may end up having to provide necessary advice and guidance as to which project delivery method should be selected over another. Each project delivery method has its own advantages as well as disadvantages, and this afternoon I plan on going through some of the advantages and disadvantages with you. So, the project delivery methods that we're going to discuss this afternoon include design, bid, build, also known as DBB, which is the stipulated price contract, okay? And we're also going to talk about design build, DB, or CM, construction management. Construction management comes with two major variations, okay? Construction management for services, as well as construction management for services and construction. We're also going to touch on the integrated project delivery, IPD, and then we'll talk about some other methods that involve land, financing, operation, and maintenance, and are typical forms that are used on significant scale and size government projects. Design, bid, build, DBB, which is also known as the stipulated price contract, and sometimes also referred to as a lump sum contract. CCDC 2 is the contract form that is typically used for design, bid, build contracts. CCDC 20 is a guide that tells you how to use the contract in itself. The stipulated price contract is the standard prime contract between the owner and the prime contractor to perform the required work for a single predetermined fixed price or lump sum, regardless of the contractor's actual costs. There are always going to be two separate contracts, one between the owner and the consultant, and one between the owner and the contractor. And construction in this instance will typically commence only after design is substantially complete. When you look at the organizational chart, or shortened form, the org chart for a design, bid, build opportunity, the owner sits at the top of the chain here, where the owner retains the architect and the engineers under one contract, and then the contractor under a separate contract. You will notice from this arrangement and agreement, or this format, that the owner does not have any contractual relationship directly with the subcontractors. That is only done through the contractors. And as you're all well aware, the architect or the consultant in this particular instance has a third-party relationship with the owner and the contractor because the consultant's responsibilities are spelled out or stipulated within the owner-contractor agreement. As you all know, with this project delivery method, It works in a very sequential order, whereby planning, design, bid, construction, and occupancy all take place one after the other. There's no way to streamline the process or to start construction earlier on under this particular model. And it's important to understand that as well. So let's talk about some advantages as well as some disadvantages. And by the way, none of this should be new because we've already talked about this in previous lectures. So some of the pros here include, this is a project delivery method that is widely used and is familiar to all project participants. Before the advent of design build or construction management or IPD, or even any of the other procurement methods that are out there, this was really the primary method of designing or developing and constructing any given project. Through this, some of the pros also include that all of the roles are clearly defined in the contract, and through resolution of design, but before construction starts, you already know the cost of construction. Yes, there may be changes that may occur during construction, but for the most part, you already know what the cost is going to be because you've gone through the bid process. And as you all know and understand, that during the bid process, you must select the low compliant bidder. Finally, one of the other largest advantages here is that the owner is assured of receiving a very known scope and quality of work prior to the commencement of construction. That is largely because the drawings and the specifications have all been prepared well in advance, and the owner has had the opportunity to either review them, or the owner has been walked through the plans and the specifications to understand what level of quality he or she may be receiving. So then we talk about some of the disadvantages. It takes a long time to go through this project delivery method. Given that it's a sequential process, it takes longer time to deliver the end result. Furthermore, this particular project delivery method does not facilitate any collaboration between the consultant and the owner. And the reason why it doesn't is because everything is done sequentially. The constructor is not brought onto the project I should say the constructor is only brought onto the project towards the end to actually build the project. But they're not brought on early enough for them to provide any input or guidance with respect to pricing, constructability, durability, or even sustainability. There are three basic contractual methods of payment for a design, bid, build contract. The first and foremost, and probably the method that is used the most, would be the stipulated price, where an amount is set forth as a total payment for the performance of the work. It's the most common standard form of construction. The cost plus contract is typically used when the scope of the work, quality, and quantity is not fully known at the time of signing the contract. The owner reimburses the contractor for actual costs incurred and then pays a fee, a percentage or a fixed fee, in addition to those actual costs. The last method is the unit price contract, and this is typically used when the type of work required is known and specified in the contract documents, but the quantities are not known when the contract is entered into. The amount payable per single unit of work as stated in a schedule of prices. Then we get into design build. When you have design build, the owner hires a design build entity to design and build a project for a set price based on a statement of requirements. The design build entity is commonly a construction firm that would subcontract the design to consultants who would be retained by the design build entity. The builder and the designer may also be part of a single integrated design build firm, or possibly a joint venture of design and construction firms. The owner's focus would be on the desired end result rather than on the details of the design. The owner would prepare an owner's statement of requirements, which sets out the requirements in terms of performance. And finally, the design builder has considerable freedom to design and construct the facility as long as it meets the owner's statement of requirements. The owner's statement of requirements may be descriptive or prescriptive, depending on who the owner is. They may be vague or they may be very specific. Some owners will put in their owner statement of requirements that they want, say, for example, a 5-story building that has 32 meeting rooms, 16 private offices, and that each floor plate should be no bigger or no smaller than X number of square feet. They may even get into talking about the types of finishes that they want to see within their own office or within their own space overall, okay? So really what they do is they put out a statement of requirements. The design build entity then takes these requirements, works through them with their architect that's been brought on the project, and will then develop what the project plan looks like, the overall design for the building, will give preliminary costing to the owner, and then would proceed to actual design, the full-on design and the overall construction. So, let's talk about some of the advantages. First and foremost, there's a single point of responsibility. As you could tell from the previous slide here, that the owner is only contracting directly with a design build entity. He does not, or she does not, have any actual relationship with the designer or the builder itself, okay? So as an architect or a designer, you will likely not have any direct relationship with this particular owner or client. So, having a single point of responsibility makes it that much easier to go and yell at somebody if something is missing or done incorrectly or not part of the project. This method is very conducive, ladies and gentlemen, very conducive to fast tracking or shortening the time to deliver the overall project. And the design builder assumes all risks for any cost increases, and I will explain that in just a moment. It facilitates a lot of collaboration between the consultant and the contractor and lends itself to fewer claims and disputes between the owner and the overall builder. So, let me go back and touch on the responsibility about, or the point about costs and how the design build entity is responsible for any cost overruns on the particular project. So, you'll notice looking at this chart here, which compares design build to the traditional design bid build approach, that after preliminary design is completed, they typically would establish what is referred to as a GMP. The word or the abbreviation GMP stands for Guaranteed Maximum Price. So once preliminary design is completed, the contractor would sit there and do a thorough analysis of the project and determine what the guaranteed maximum price is going to be. In determining this, the contractor takes into consideration the materials that are going to be used, the size and the complexity of the building, the schedule, etc. And what they'll do is they will say to the owner, for your building, we are going to offer you a guaranteed maximum price of $10 million. Now, if the building ends up costing $8 million to build, well, guess what? The design build entity will pocket the other $2 million. However, on the flip side, if the building ends up costing $14 million to build and construct, the design builder will be out of pocket the additional $4 million because they have entered into a guaranteed maximum price with the owner. Is that clear to everybody? Or are there any questions about GMP? Ada says yes. Dina says no. Is that yes to it's clear or yes, there are questions? No questions. Excellent. Okay. Deja, about the methods of payment, we can come back to that towards the end of the lecture, but I'll definitely come back to it. Okay. So now when you compare design build versus the traditional design bid build, you will realize that with design build, there's an opportunity to save time and money, okay? Judging by the chart that's on the screen, you'll notice that there's this gap here, which is the savings of time and money. And because the final cost is actually determined here with the GMP, compared to a design build approach, the final cost is always determined towards the end of the project. And you can turn around and be like, well, hold on a second. Previously, you just turned around and said to us that the owner knows what the cost of construction is going to be at the onset. And the answer is yes. At the end of the bid phase, the owner knows exactly how much the project is going to cost them. However, should there be any changes or any coordination-related issues that arise, then guess what? The owner will not have an opportunity to know what that final cost of construction is until the end of construction in the traditional design bid build approach. Okay? To Nicholas's question, what would happen if there'd be a $4 million additional cost? Would the work need to stop until funds are secured? Absolutely not. Under the design build approach with the GMP, should the building cost that extra $4 million, it's coming out of the contractor's pocket because they have guaranteed the owner a maximum price to build the building. Does that make sense? Perfect. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages now. The responsibility for design approvals now shifts from the owner to the design builder. Decisions by the design builder are based more on the initial cost rather than on design or long-term value. The cost is determined before the design is complete, and the architect's role as the leader of the design team is significantly reduced. CCDC 15 is the design services contract between the design builder and the overall consultant. This is the standard contract between the design builder and the consultants to perform the design services that are required under a design build contract between the owner and the design builder. Similar to the standard client consultant contract, CCDC 15 lists the basic design services considered necessary in design build contracts. Design services are listed in a schedule format with checkboxes, which allows for flexibility in establishing the scope of services and the compensation method for the consultant. A second schedule is included, listing typical additional design services that the consultant may be required to provide at an additional service or fee. The design builder's roles and responsibilities are also spelled out, as well as the consultant's roles and responsibilities. Overall, the architect's role is significantly reduced because they are taking all of their direction from the design build entity itself. Something to keep in mind. There's also a risk to the architect or the designer in preparing their overall proposal. A high risk to the architect in preparing the proposal is that they may end up providing a price, but then having to do a lot more work, okay, as a result of changes that may occur in the project or directions given by the design build entity. Furthermore, there is potential for tension between the architect and the contractor, because you have to understand that the architect or the technologist is a regulated profession, and it's regulated by the province that you're in, by for example, in Ontario, the Architects Act. And the contractor's role is, generally speaking, an unregulated profession. Contractors are not bound by any sort of an act, other than being bound by a professional code of conduct, should they be a member of an organization like the Canadian Construction Association. The potential conflicts of interest may occur in preparing change orders and payment certification, because the architect's client and the builder are one into the same. As discussed, there are two forms of contract that would get signed for this particular project delivery method. The first being the design-build stipulated price contract between owner and design builder, and then secondly, the design services contract between the builder and the consultant. And we move on to construction management. Let's take a 5-minute break here and then reconvene to go through the role of the construction manager and this project delivery method.